everyone. I'm so excited to have Nebe with us today from the Menopause Coach. She is an Ontological and Embodiment Coach specializing in menopause support and education. She's a menopause activist and a policy advisor, and she also offers menopause retreats. And so I'd just like to hand over to you straight away to give us a bit of an introduction. Welcome.
Hi, Kat. Thanks for this. So I come from a corporate background, I guess, and then decided to go into coaching at some point. And so my coaching is based on neuroscience, biology, philosophy, and mindfulness. And I'd been coaching for about 12, almost 13 years and running retreats. And at the same time was navigating my own personal menopause journey, which was quite challenging, continues to be challenging. And I realized that, even though most of my clients were female, that we'd never ever discussed menopause. It had never come up. And I was very aware that a lot of them were dealing with anxiety, insomnia, weight gain, low mood, all of those sort of things. But we were working with them in isolation. And it was only really when my symptoms got so challenging that I couldn't function that I really took a deep dive into the research. And wow, I didn't quite realize what I was going to find. And it was quite distressing, actually, to realize that there's been so little research around this topic and that women are not being supported, that they are suffering in silence. And so once I sort of got on top of my symptoms, I was able to really immerse myself in the data. So I have really based my work on evidence, and I read a lot of PubMed research papers now, which I wouldn't have been able to do a few years ago because my brain was just not able to hold the information because of the lack of estrogen. And so I've been coaching in this space now for about 2 years, particularly in this space. I still offer my other coaching, just, lifestyle and business coaching. But I've really wanted to focus on this because I really think there's just not enough focus on it in terms of supporting women.
Perfect. You've actually answered the second question with this as well, which was sort of how did you get into it and what makes you keep going in this domain. It's a very worthy cause to pursue, like you said, because there definitely isn't enough data, especially in South Africa. What are your thoughts on, this leads us to the next question exactly, what are your thoughts on female delta and wellness, especially in the South African context?
Well, there just really isn't any. There are people who are starting to do the research, especially on, menopause wellness in the workplace. I think that's something that we really need to focus on, actually, in this country. Certainly, as far as I'm aware, there's no specific research being done on perimenopause or menopausal women. And certainly, even in the world, if you do a PubMed, which is where all the, medical publications or research papers are published. If you do a PubMed search, there's about 7,000 papers on perimenopause. There are about 102,000 results for menopause. But then if you look at something like pregnancy, over 1.2 million papers published. So it's just an indication of, well, to me, I'm making a big assessment here, but it's like once we've done with our reproductive years, we become insignificant, which is really sad because women have got so much to offer and have so much life experience to share, particularly in the workplace.
Yeah, exactly. I think the research has only just begun and definitely not here. Okay, so let's chat about inclusive dialogue around women's health. You did touch on it just now. Why is this so important?
Well, because we've just, women have just been left out of the equation for so long. Research was not done on women until 1993, clinical research. And that's quite shocking. When I delved into the history, they even would use male mice, not female mice, because they assessed that it would just be too complicated in terms of our hormonal fluctuations and so on. So it's so important for us to have these conversations, to advocate for ourselves, to educate ourselves, to become aware of what's actually going on, to understand that, most clinicians have no clinicians all over the world, they don't have training in menopause. And so unless they take time out of their schedules to focus on it and learn about it and research it, they just don't have the skills to support women. And a lot of doctors will admit to that. I've had the experience of a doctor saying to me, well, I don't know anything about hormones. And I'm like, well, 99% of your clients are women over 50. How can you not know anything about hormones? So it is about creating conversations, bringing it into the fore, out into the fore. I think there's just been too much stigma attached to it. And these assessments around, women are just too complicated to study. It's just not okay. We know that, as little as I can't point to South African research and I can't point to South African data because there just isn't any. But for example, in the States, only 1% of research funding is spent on women over 40. And that's similar in the UK as well.
Yes.
So I think it's about conversations, bringing it out into the public and educating ourselves and learning to advocate for ourselves, to ask the uncomfortable questions of our practitioners so that we can challenge their beliefs and the way they're working, so that they hopefully also get more educated and start advocating for more research.
You're so right about that, because I actually read an interesting stat, I think it was last night, the fact that our medical, especially in the Western Cape, our medical students are not getting enough information on dealing with plant-based diets, which is a totally irrelevant, it's not the same conversation, but still it goes to show, one would think that that's part of the normal course work, and apparently 87% said they needed help, they needed more information. So you're so right about that. Let's unpack your style of coaching, which is combining biology, neuroscience and philosophy. Tell us a bit about this.
So I, in terms of an ontological approach, we coach to way of being. And what that means is we look at all the domains of what it means to be human. And that includes language. So how do we language ourselves on a daily basis? And what kind of language are we using that possibly limits our possibilities, limits opportunities? Because language is how we create reality and how we take action and we make things happen. And part of language is also listening. So how do we listen to ourselves, so that negative self-talk or, self-flagellation that we might have? How do we also listen to others? Are we listening openly? Or are we kind of filtering through our own experiences? And then the other two domains that we focus on are moods and emotions. So what moods and emotions are we living in? Usually emotions, we can experience an array of different emotions in one day, for example, but a mood might linger longer and sit in the background, and we may not even be aware of it. So I find a lot of my clients are often living in a mood of resignation or in anxiety, and they're not aware of it at all. And then how does that predispose you for taking action and for creating the life that you want to live? How does it limit your opportunities and your possibilities? And then we focus on the body and that entails hormones. The nervous system plays a major role. If we want to create change for ourselves, that's where we need to go. We need to create change through the nervous system. And so in terms of my coaching approach, we're delving into all three of those domains all of the time. And, when I start with coaching someone, so say for example, in particularly with regards to menopause, my initial question might be, what is the story you tell yourself about menopause? And that often can, tell me quite a lot. And in terms of how they language themselves, whether they see it as an opportunity or a life stage for growth and transformation, or whether they see it as being something really challenging and hard, And so then we get a sense of what mood they might be living in relation to menopause. And then we can start looking at, what are the assessments that we hold around menopause, because that's informing the story. And so, we live in assessments. We make meaning of the world through assessments or opinions. And often we hold those as the truth or fact, and that's not necessarily the case. And then that can limit our possibilities. So for me, I walk alongside someone. It is a partnering, a gentle guiding and asking questions that may perturb the nervous system a little bit, but it's definitely not about me knowing everything and telling someone how to navigate their lives. It's about me creating a space for them to explore and find their own innate wisdom, which we all have. So it is about coming to the client with compassion, just gently nudging, I would say.
Yeah, it's quite a lot, but it's also great that you've got a holistic kind of plan instead of just focusing on one area. You've shared the fact, this was shocking when I read it, you shared the fact that by the end of this year, an estimated 1.1 billion women will be post-menopausal. How can we empower ourselves while we navigate these transitions?
So firstly, I'd like to... Yeah, there's a lot.
It is. So maybe if we look at like your top 3, because it is quite open-ended.
I think the thing that what stands out for me there is I'd like to just also point to the fact that, when we use the word post-menopause, what I've noticed is a lot of women tend to think that that means they're over it. They've gone through menopause and it's over. And that's not true. We are in ovarian failure for the rest of our lives. Okay, we don't have these key hormones for the rest of our lives. And so we are at risk, in terms of health risks, cardiovascular being the big one, osteoporosis, diabetes, dementia, etc. And so I just want to point that out. So that means that we have 1.1 or whatever billion women in the world living in menopause, literally living with menopausal symptoms or challenges unless they're getting support. So for me, the biggest one actually is facing our stressors. We really underplay. I've noticed a lot of practitioners underplay that role. And stress plays a major role in terms of impacting our hormones, particularly estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. I mean, mostly, if we're living in chronic stress, our body favors cortisol over progesterone. And progesterone is a calming, it has those GABA qualities and has a calming quality. So that will impact, and then it impacts on fertility at the end of the day. So whether that means while you are premenopausal. So I think that focusing on that is crucial. And, some women may think that, oh no, I'm okay. I'm not stressed. But once you go into this phase of life, you automatically lose these hormones, these 3 key hormones, and then your cortisol levels rise anyway, whether you like it or not. And if you are living in chronic stress, which a lot of people are, I mean, there's just no denying it. We're living in a very volatile, uncertain environment, and the nervous system is being perturbed on a daily basis. So I think it's really important for women to find support, ask for help, find a support structure whether it's a community or a coach or a practitioner, and also to find restorative practices that, whether it's breath work or, gentle yoga practices, meditation, walking in nature. Nature is free and we have it. Most of us have it on our doorstep, and we can lower our cortisol levels just by walking in nature. So, and then to be incredibly compassionate with themselves. Self-compassion is a really key component here in helping to lower cortisol levels, but also in terms of encouraging ourselves as we go through this transition. Yeah.
I just wanted to add with the cortisol, it's also anything low impact, because I know weight fluctuations do start creeping in, and they're not nice for anyone to go through. So your immediate thing is this: I've got to do cardio, I've got to do intense this and that, but it actually works so badly with your cortisol, it actually increases it even more. That was one of the things I learned recently, was that you've got to stay with low impact. It's just as effective and actually so much better for your nervous system to create.
Yeah, so I mean, the more cardio at this stage would be creating more inflammation, higher levels of cortisol. So, yes, it is about lifting heavy weights, but it's less reps. It's slowly, mindfully, and doing those very, very short intervals, like 30 seconds of getting your heart rate up, and then taking 2 minutes to recover, and only doing that 4 times after you've done 45 minutes of low intensity. And then, doing restorative practices, that's the way to come back to center.
Menopause has been given plenty of airtime in the last 2 years. Is it enough? I feel like there's still confusion because the data doesn't seem conclusive or concrete, and because everyone is different and presents differently, and a lot of the symptoms sort of overlap each other at times. I think you did mention earlier already that there's a lot of data that needs to happen in comparison to everything else, and especially in South Africa, we are really behind with that.
Yeah, unfortunately, women are not being really listened to. And in perimenopause, I mean, that can start. So if you're going through menopause, that's the other thing. Everybody says, oh, menopause is a natural process. If you're lucky. For some women, they obviously experience surgical menopause through hysterectomies, through oophorectomies, etc. And also they also experience chemical menopause through chemotherapy and radiation. And that can happen at any age. I've met someone who experienced chemical menopause through radiation and chemo at the age of 14.
Wow.
And that's something we don't talk about. How many young girls go through cancer treatment, and are they being offered hormone replacement therapy because at that stage, so young, your hormone levels are very high. So to just suddenly not have them puts you at great risk for long-term health consequences. But in terms of perimenopause, if you're going through this transition naturally, it could start as early as in your early 30s. We have evidence to show that we are losing eggs, literally from being in the uterus to, the minute we come out, we lose a huge quantity of eggs, and then subsequently over the years losing even more. And by 32, you kind of at a place where you don't have that much, that many eggs available, viable eggs available. And certainly stress plays a role in that. Yeah, perimenopause can start in your early 30s. Yes, the average age is about 45. And then it can last up to anything from 2 to 14 years. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to kind of diagnose, because taking bloods is not going to show you anything, because you're going up and down. So the hormones are fluctuating very radically. You could take bloods in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and it'll be different, completely different each time. So it's so important for women to be heard, for doctors to know what the symptoms are, for women to know what the symptoms are, to keep a diary, keep a journal of what's going on. What's going on, because even language starts, women start losing language. Look at what's going on with language. Look at what's going on with moods and emotions. Keep a diary. Am I, suddenly in, very low mood? Am I starting to forget things? And then what's going on in my body? The weight fluctuations, the loss of muscle mass starts to creep in. Heart palpitations, and unfortunately in perimenopause, 1 minute it could be all about brain fog, but then that might sort of rectify itself, and then suddenly it's about itchy skin and itchy ears and tinnitus and TMJ and things like that. So unfortunately it is a very sort of volatile stage of life, and certainly and I had no idea that I'd never even heard of perimenopause. I mean, I didn't know that I was in perimenopause, and I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. So, I mean, that radical fatigue can happen at that stage already. And, I was training really, really hard at that stage, and I had no hormones in my system. And so there was nothing to support me. So that's, I think it's really is about tuning in with ourselves and then finding the right support to be able to talk about it and hopefully find a practitioner that will really listen.
Support, yeah. Okay, this is actually a really interesting question. Tell us about your menopausal-friendly policies in the workplace. What's impacted? How do the policies address this? And how do both parties benefit? It's such an interesting, I don't know anyone else that is currently doing this. I had severe endometriosis when I was in my 20s, but I couldn't come to work, I couldn't stand, it was very, very bad. And it was brushed off as a joke, it's not real, that kind of thing. So this is so refreshing to see that people are starting to take this seriously, and then how it affects your career, and especially in a male dominated environment like corporate.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it still feels like early days in South Africa. There is a willingness for corporates to engage and to have workshops on menopause. I've had a few of those experiences, being invited into corporate. In fact, the next Wednesday, Thursday this week, I'm going to be running 8 sessions with a corporate. But what I'm not seeing yet, to be honest, is a fully enforced menopause policy. So where we've looked at current policies, so maternity policies, compassionate leave policies, etc., and then, altered them to support women in menopause. And, there should be menstrual policies as well. So I know that some companies definitely have something around, menstruation now. But in terms of having actually enforced a menopause policy, I'm yet to see that really happen in South Africa. Definitely there's an openness to start engaging and start talking about it and to educate their staff. Whether that's enough, that isn't enough, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's important for us to be, as I said, creating policies where we look at, flexible working hours, flexible working environments, what is more conducive for a woman, in menopause in terms of where she actually works, if she's working in an office, leave, because sometimes if women are not being on hormone replacement therapy and not being supported correctly, there are much higher sort of mental health issues. There's a lot of depression, suicide rates go up around this time as well. So in terms of also supporting them with coaching groups or therapy or whatever in relation to menopause, I'm yet to see that being offered and being put into place in South Africa. In terms of, in the UK at the moment, that is enforced now. There is a menopause workplace policy that each corporate needs to put into place, and that was brought in by the government. I think we're still early days. Yeah. So I mean,
I think that even if they put those policies in place, and without sounding negative, but just from what I've experienced, the hiring might change. I have no doubt that there'll be certain companies, especially the financial services sectors and that will just go, okay, well, if you're going to have all of these put on us, I might just, prefer to hire a man because it's simpler, it's easier. So there's that side of it as well. It's like, well, how do we know that actually there's equity in this and there's equality? Because if we look at salaries and that's still way behind. Women are doing this exact same things and their counterparts are being paid double. So it's a
yeah,
horrible,
it's
yeah.
it is early days for us, as I said, and I think that unfortunately what they don't understand is that actually, by helping women and supporting women through this phase of life or into this stage of life, they will be having less resignations,
Exactly.
less turnover of staff, less absenteeism, more productivity, etc., etc. But I don't think there's enough awareness yet, yeah, in South
No,
Africa.
but it would be great. It would be wonderful if we sort of got that kick started. What is the latest research indicating on nutrition and movement specifically when it comes to menopause? How does this factor into menopause?
So I do I don't know if you know, but I do a 10-week menopause education course online. And as I said, the work is very much evidence-based. So the research that I've looked at and that I advocate for is based on a massive research study that has been done in the UK. And then there's also another study that Dr. Lisa Mosconi, the neuroscientist, has also mentioned, where there were over 14,000 women enrolled in the study. And definitely there is evidence to show that a Mediterranean diet, a more green Mediterranean diet, is what we're looking at in terms of supporting women through this transition. And so that is heavily plant-based, with more emphasis on the greens, so the cruciferous veggies and so on, with olive oil being your main healthy fat. But also looking at things like avocado and nuts and seeds and things like that. So not a huge amount of animal products, but yes, there is evidence to show that having oily fish and lean white meats like chicken and turkey, etc., can sort of 2 or 3 times a week is okay. Maybe once or twice a week some red meat, but again lean meat. And then so staying away from processed foods essentially, and eating whole foods, which is, it's all very well to say that that's the way to go, but we also need to bear in mind that we're living here in South Africa. 90% of people don't have access or don't have the money to eat whole foods like that, especially organic. And of course, that's ideally where we want to be, is eating organic. So it is a little bit tricky, I think, for most people. But yes, that's what the evidence is showing. And then in terms of movement, definitely, low intensity with short bursts of high intensity training, and then lots of, time to recover, and then lifting, heavy weights, doing bouncy movements that restore the fascia in terms of restorative movements. So really gentle, bouncy movements, being more mindful with how we move in terms of more gentle practices. But then, really doing simple things like, jumping 20 times a day on a hard surface is fantastic for bone density, building bone density. Dancing, that kind of thing. So it's definitely less of this emphasis on running marathons and doing this kind of long hauls of high intensity training.
Let's chat about preventative and protective measures. Are there any, and how do genetics play into this?
In terms of going into, it's interesting, some of the millennials are kind of starting to, already ask questions on how to prepare for perimenopause and menopause, which is fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it is about lowering stress levels, finding restorative practices, eating a whole foods diet, plant-based, starting already to move differently. I think being in community is a big thing as well. Finding a community that you can really bond with and talk with around what's going on for you. There's definitely a move away from, certainly in other countries, a move away from alcohol. That was a really big thing for me, was to realize that, or understand that alcohol is causing cancer. I mean, and it has been labeled as a type 1 carcinogen since 1988, and yet nobody talks about it. So the ethanol is toxic, and it's been linked to 7 types of cancers, including breast cancer. You have a much higher risk of developing breast cancer if you're drinking alcohol, and that's not a lot of alcohol. That's just one or, 3 glasses of wine a week. So there's definitely, I think, moving away from that and being, there's a group of people creating events called Sober Curiosity, where they only serve non-alcoholic drinks and people come sober and they actually have conversations, which sounds, I'm like, when I was 30, what was I doing? And yeah, so I think that, and then, as we're going into perimenopause, to start making choices around, am I going to explore hormone replacement therapy? Because that's the time to look at it and to make your choice and decide how you want to live into your menopausal years. We do want to prevent osteoporosis. 1 in 2 women get osteoporosis. We do want to prevent heart disease. So that's the number 1 killer of women. We do want to prevent, mental health issues and so on. So early perimenopause is the time to start making those choices.
Exactly, and sort of empower from a knowledge perspective, sort of read up, ask the questions, yeah. Okay, how important, oh, you've just touched on this actually. How important is community during this time? I can imagine there are feelings of isolation and perhaps even fear. How can we close the gap? Yeah, you basically just
It's so important. I find women still don't, especially maybe less so my age, maybe a little bit older, I don't know, are still not talking about menopause. I mean, in my group of close friends, that's all I talk about, really. I suppose it's because it's my work, and I'm really passionate about it. But, once we go into this phase, it is important to have community and to be able to lean on each other. One does tend to, it happened to me, my symptoms got so bad that I couldn't leave the house at one point because of physical symptoms, and the isolation became real, and I found myself in an incredibly dark place. And this is happening to a lot of women. And unfortunately, they're being misdiagnosed and put on antidepressants. But this is a time to reach out and to connect and to find pockets of community where you feel safe, you feel you are able to talk about what's going on for you physically, emotionally, mentally, etc. And certainly it does, we produce more oxytocin, our bonding hormone, connection hormone, when we are listened to, So I find, particularly on my retreats, they just love the fact that someone's listening to them. It's the biggest thing for them. And then I think to myself, my goodness, does that mean no one ever listens?
Exactly what I just thought.
It's
sad.
But I see it over and over again. So it's about creating those spaces to feel safe and heard.
That's amazing. I can say from my age group, I'm 44, I have noticed that even though it's like surreptitious and you pick who you want to speak to about it, we are starting to have those conversations, especially like perimenopause. Do you have it? What is it like? who's your doctor, who must I go to, what should I be taking to help myself. So we're having those conversations already and just trying to, I wouldn't say prevent it, but like support as it starts. Like, what are the things that I need? Okay, is everything in place? So from that perspective, and it's really nice. It's lovely to have someone to turn to ask those questions. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
What are your top 3 menopause myths that you'd love to eradicate?
I think the one big one is that, and I mentioned it previously, that I hear a lot of older women say, "Oh, I'm past that phase. I've been through menopause." Or even women who've had hysterectomies saying things like, "I didn't go through menopause," and I'm like, but that can set you up for early menopause, you know. So I'm very sort of, what do you mean by that? And that's just not true. So we land up going into hormone insufficiency or hormone deficiency, and we go into ovarian failure. You know, I was listening to a fertility doctor, and from their perspective, it's not called menopause, it's ovarian failure. And that's what it is. And so those hormones, which we have receptors for throughout our entire body, including the brain, those receptors don't die. They are constantly looking for hormones. And so what I see is a lot of women saying, "Oh, I've been through it," or "I'm over it," and yet they are suffering with depression. They have high blood pressure. They have arthritis, they have osteoporosis, diabetes. I mean, type 2 diabetes, we know that's very prevalent. And all of that is related to not having our hormones. So that's one myth I want to debunk completely. And the other one is that HRT is unsafe, that menopause hormone therapy is unsafe. It's not. In fact, estrogen is anti-inflammatory and can be preventative of many diseases, including cancer. And then the third one is that we do not, you know, I think a lot of women, and it's a cultural thing, I think we've been set up to suffer and to fear our hormones and doubt our brains. And it's not necessary. It's not necessary. It's absolutely fine to ask for help. And I really advise women to make requests and ask for help and to stop thinking that suffering is okay. You know, I often hear women talk about having heavy periods and having lots of pain before they go into this transition, and they think that's normal. And I've seen comments on social media where older women have said, "For goodness sake, in my day, I just used to take Panado. Just get over it." And I'm like, no, that's the problem, you know, is that we've conditioned and we've created this society where it's okay for women to suffer. It's not okay.
It's unnecessary, actually.
Yeah, completely.
Perfect. Thank you so much for today. I've got one last question. Do you have any collabs events? I know you've got your retreats that you want to chat about briefly, and then just to give us your contact details so whoever's watching knows where to find you.
So I've just run a retreat now, and I'm going to be looking at doing more in the new year. It's called the Pause Retreat, and you can find that on my website. And so, you know, it's a bit of, you know, restorative practices, meditation, guided meditation. So it's not this kind of sitting in silence. It is about education. It is about coming into community, feeling heard and held. And sometimes I bring a bit of creativity into it as well. I'm also a process art facilitator. And then, yeah, I mean, one thing I'd like to highlight is the 10-week menopause course, which I'll be taking in my third cohort in February 2026, so early February 2026. And that's a very detailed, deep dive for women, for in general, but also for practitioners. So for doctors, for nurse practitioners, for coaches, anyone who's actually taking care of women. And yeah, in the meantime, I'm obviously open to one-on-one coaching and also open to collaboration with others, you know, very keen for us to grow this community. And people can find me at themenopausecoach.co.
Perfect. And you on Instagram, any socials you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's Karen Nebe _ the menopause coach, and I think Facebook is, well, it's linked to that. So I'm not very good at all of this stuff. I'm
No,
not.
I'm sure they'll
It's,
find
you
you.
know, I've just done another podcast, and I just slapped it onto social media, and that's, and then it's like another few weeks and something might come up, but I'm
The
not.
best place is the website.
Is the website, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really informative.
Thanks, Kat, yeah.